The Union Pacific Big Boy, 135,000 pounds of tractive effort, 300 pounds per square inch boiler pressure, 8 units preserved, a name every rail fan on Earth knows. The undisputed king of American steam. But in 1949, a locomotive was engineered with one mission: dethrone it. On paper, it succeeded. 146,000 pounds of force, 7,300 tons hauled solo, where the Big Boy could not. Yet every unit was scrapped. No preservation, no legacy. To understand what history buried, you first need to understand exactly what the Big Boy was and what it wasn't. Union Pacific Big Boy number 4014 stands as the physical embodiment of American steam power, a machine whose numbers are as staggering as its reputation. Ask any museum curator, and they will point to the official Union Pacific vital stats sheet: 300 psi boiler pressure, 135,000 pounds of tractive effort, 68-inch driving wheels, and a total length of 132 feet from coupler to coupler. Even now, more than 80 years after its debut, number 4014 draws crowds in the thousands. In 2019, when the locomotive returned to steam after a 6-year restoration, attendance logs recorded over 250,000 visitors across just one tour season. On display in Cheyenne, daily visitor counts regularly top 1,200, with fans lining up for a glimpse of the world's largest operating steam locomotive. 8 Big Boys survive today, scattered from Omaha to Dallas to Scranton, each one a monument in steel and rivets. But only number 4014 runs under its own power, a living link to an era when raw force and technical audacity ruled the rails. The numbers are not just legend, they are verifiable. The builder's plate from Alco lists the same 135,000 pounds of tractive effort that appears in every museum exhibit and technical manual. The 300 psi boiler, tested and retested in the shops, remains the gold standard for American articulated steam. Every restoration milestone, every public display is logged and cataloged, reinforcing the Big Boy's status as both artifact and benchmark. In the world of steam, myths are easy to come by, but the Big Boy's legend is grounded in hard evidence, preserved in the records of Union Pacific and the testimony of those who have stood beside its towering wheels. It is this precision, the ability to point to a spec sheet, to a builder's drawing, to a living, breathing machine that sets the Big Boy apart. Before any rival can claim the crown, it must first contend with these numbers, these facts, and this enduring presence. Freight traffic across the American West did not just grow after World War II, it exploded. Between 1945 and 1950, railroads like Union Pacific recorded a staggering 40% spike in tonnage. Dispatch planners, armed with fresh charts and slide rules, faced a new daily reality. More cars per train, longer consists, and heavier loads straining every mile of main line. The numbers on their desks told a sobering story. Average train lengths jumped from 80 to 120 cars, pushing the limits of every bridge, siding, and locomotive fleet in service. But the real bottleneck was the terrain. The Wasatch Grade, climbing out of Ogden, Utah, stood as the ultimate test. 1.14% sustained uphill for miles with no relief. Every additional ton of wheat, iron ore, or wartime surplus sent up that slope demanded more power than the last. Standard engines, even the mighty Big Boy, could only do so much. On paper, the Big Boy was built for these grades, but dispatchers knew the margin for error was razor thin. Delays stacked up as trains stalled or required double heading, turning tight schedules into logistical headaches. Operating costs soared. Each extra helper locomotive meant more crew, more fuel, and more time lost to breakdowns and maintenance. The old solutions, just add another engine or just stretch the schedule, no longer worked. The pressure was now systemic, not just seasonal. Railroads faced a choice: either find a new kind of power or risk losing business to trucks and highways that were rapidly improving. The status quo was unsustainable. Planners and engineers began studying every grade profile, every tonnage chart, searching for a breakthrough, a locomotive that could turn the tide and restore order to a system on the brink of gridlock. Even legends have blind spots. For all its power, the big boy was never a locomotive for every job or every track. Shop records from Cheyenne tell a story that rarely makes it into the glossy brochures. The big boy's articulated frame demanded a minimum 23 chain curve, about 460 meters, meaning it was locked out of the tighter, twisting lines that made up much of the Western network. Dispatchers quietly mapped its allowed routes on oversized charts, marking out vast stretches of track as off-limits. For the men in the roundhouse, the challenges were just as real. With a 70-ton axle load, the big boy's weight was a constant strain on bridges and rails, requiring frequent inspections and upgrades. Track foremen logged extra hours after every run, checking for stress fractures that lighter engines would never have caused. Maintenance was a battle against scale. Overhaul logs show that each big boy demanded hundreds of shop hours every year, replacing firebox stays, repacking bearings, and adjusting the intricate valve gear that powered its massive cylinders. A foreman's report from 1952, still filed in the Union Pacific Archives, puts it bluntly: "No other engine eats up shop time like the 4000s. We finish one, and two more are waiting." Spare parts had to be stockpiled in advance. And even routine service could sideline a locomotive for weeks, leaving dispatchers scrambling to fill the gap. These constraints weren't just technical footnotes. They shaped every decision about where and how the big boy could run. For all its headline numbers, the engine's operational world was surprisingly narrow. Any rival hoping to dethrone, it would have to do more than match its brute force. It would need to go further, run on tighter curves, and stay out of the shop longer. The question was simple: could a new design close the gap and break free from the limits that defined the big boy's reign? Southern Pacific's answer to the big boy was not just another giant. It was a locomotive born from a mandate to break the rules of steam. The name on the builder's plate read AC-9, but in the offices of Southern Pacific's mechanical department, it was known as the engine that might finally tip the balance of power in the West. R.M. Murray, the railroad's chief mechanical engineer, drafted the original design memo in late 1948. His language was blunt. This locomotive must be capable of hauling 7,000 tons over the Sierra Nevada without assistance, and it must do so with less fuel, less crew fatigue, and fewer shop hours than any engine before it. The order to Baldwin Locomotive Works was placed in early 1949, and the specification list was unlike anything the company had ever received. Murray's vision was shaped by the daily grind of mountain railroading. He had seen crews stagger off conventional engines, faces blackened by smoke after hours in the tunnels. The AC-9 would be different. The cab-forward layout, already a Southern Pacific signature, was pushed even further, placing the crew ahead of the boiler and away from the worst of the fumes. The design called for a 4/8/8/2 wheel arrangement, promising more tractive effort than even the big boy could muster. Internal documents demanded a static pull of 146,000 pounds, outclassing Union Pacific's Titan by more than 10,000 pounds on paper. But the mission was not just brute force. Murray insisted on a locomotive that could run longer between overhauls, tackle sharper curves, and sip coal at a rate that would make the bean counters smile. The AC-9's blueprint included a Worthington feedwater heater, a mechanical stoker, and a boiler designed for maximum efficiency. Every line in the memo pointed to one goal: create a machine that would not only match the big boy, but leave it behind, both in the record books and on the rails. The stakes were clear. Southern Pacific was betting its future on a single class of engine, one that could restore order to a railroad stretched thin by post-war demand. For a brief moment, the AC-9 looked poised to rewrite the pecking order of American steam. Yet today, few outside the most dedicated rail historians remember its name. How does a locomotive built to be king end up as a footnote? The answer lies not just in engineering, but in the choices that followed, and the unforgiving pace of railroad history. Southern Pacific's AC-9 wasn't content to follow the playbook laid down by the big boy. Instead, the team at Baldwin Locomotive Works set out to address the very weaknesses that dogged Union Pacific's giant. The first and most visible difference was the cab-forward design. By moving the crew ahead of the boiler, engineers and firemen escaped the choking smoke that filled mountain tunnels, a daily hazard on the Sierra Nevada. This layout, already a Southern Pacific hallmark, was pushed even further on the AC-9, with a tilted boiler that kept the center of gravity low and stability high, especially on the region's sharper curves. Fuel efficiency was another battleground. The AC-9's Worthington 3B feedwater heater preheated incoming water using exhaust steam, a move that cut coal consumption by an estimated 12% compared to the big boy. Internal memos from Baldwin's design office detail how this system, paired with a mechanical stoker, allowed for a steady, regulated fire, reducing the fireman's workload and keeping combustion consistent on the longest grades. For crews used to the backbreaking labor of hand firing, this was more than a technical upgrade. It was a revolution in daily life. Beneath the boiler, the AC-9's running gear told its own story. Instead of simply scaling up, Baldwin engineers reimagined the axle and valve gear arrangement. The Walschaerts valve gear, paired with piston valves, offered smoother steam delivery and simpler maintenance than the big boy's Baker gear. Change orders issued during construction, especially EC12 through EC18, document repeated tweaks to axle spacing and crank design. These adjustments weren't just for show. They aimed to spread weight more evenly across the rails, lowering per-axle stress and opening up routes that were off-limits to heavier engines. Every feature, from the high-pressure boiler to the reinforced crank axles, was chosen to outlast and outperform the competition. Baldwin's shop drawings highlight a firebox with more heating surface than the big boy, a detail that promised higher sustained output on steep climbs. The result was a machine that, on paper and in early trials, looked poised to rewrite the rules of mountain railroading. Yet as the ink dried on the final blueprints, a question lingered in the minds of both engineers and railroad men. Would innovation alone be enough to earn a place in history? Southern Pacific's AC-9 entered the arena not as a rumor or a hopeful prototype, but as a machine with numbers to rival any legend. The builder's test sheet, stamped Baldwin Locomotive Works and signed off by R.M. Murray himself, reads like a challenge to Union Pacific's crown. At its heart, a 250 pounds per square inch boiler, lower than the big boy's 300 pounds per square inch on paper, but paired with a firebox that boasted over 7,800 square feet of heating surface. The real headline, though, is the tractive effort, 146,000 pounds, a clear step above the big boy's 135,000. For every ton of freight, the AC-9 promised more pull, more muscle, and according to the trial logs, less fuel burned along the way. Numbers alone can be slippery, but the trial records from Donner Pass leave little room for doubt. On June 17, 1950, AC-9 number 5607 was coupled to a 7,300-ton consist, the heaviest freight Southern Pacific had ever attempted to haul over the Sierra Nevada in a single pull. The dispatcher's log, now preserved in the Southern Pacific Historical Society archive, records the climb in detail: steady throttle, 30 miles per hour sustained over the summit, no helper engines attached. The big boy's best documented haul on similar grades topped out at 6,500 tons, often with a second locomotive assisting on the steepest stretches. The AC-9's performance was not just a one-off. Factory acceptance reports from Baldwin show repeat trials, each time confirming the locomotive's ability to achieve its design targets. The Worthington feedwater heater, the mechanical stoker, and the cab-forward layout all contributed to measurable gains in efficiency. Fuel records from the first 6 months of service indicate a 12% reduction in coal consumption per mile compared to the big boy, even as the AC-9 pulled heavier loads at comparable speeds. On paper and in practice, the AC-9 was built to dethrone a legend. The numbers: 146,000 pounds of tractive effort, 7,300 tons at 30 miles per hour, 250 pounds per square inch of boiler pressure, are not just claims. They are logged, signed, and filed in the archives, waiting for someone to ask why a locomotive this capable could slip so quietly into obscurity. The showdown was real. The data is undeniable. And yet only one machine became immortal. The question lingers. What does it take for innovation to be remembered? And what gets left behind when history crowns its kings? Trouble surfaced in the spring of 1952, when shop logs from Southern Pacific's Sacramento facility recorded a series of hairline cracks in the AC-9's main driving axles. The notation from Shop EC21, dated March 18th, describes a fracture running nearly a third of the way through the steel, barely visible to the naked eye, but enough to sideline the locomotive for weeks. Repair invoices from that month show a spike in overtime hours and a sudden uptick in replacement parts ordered from Baldwin. The finance board demanded answers, as the cost of keeping the AC-9s on the rails began to rival their supposed fuel savings. In a memo, the shop foreman put it bluntly: "We fix one crack and another appears by the end of the week. This is not sustainable." The sense of unease spread quickly through management. For all its promise, the AC-9 was starting to look vulnerable, its innovative design now shadowed by doubts about long-term reliability and mounting repair costs. The numbers that once set it apart were now matched by a growing stack of invoices and engineering bulletins, each one chipping away at the locomotive's claim to the throne. Cost tables from the Association of American Railroads landed on executive desks like a verdict. By 1952, the numbers left little room for sentiment. Diesel locomotives delivered the same tonnage as the biggest steam giants for 30% less in total operating costs. A procurement ledger from Southern Pacific's finance office, dated March 1953, captures the moment the tide turned. An order for 30 EMDF-7 units, signed and approved in a single afternoon. Internal memos from the era read with a sense of inevitability. One planner put it plainly: if the ledger doesn't balance, the engine doesn't run. Diesel's edge was not just in fuel savings. Labor hours plummeted, maintenance budgets shrank, and parts inventories for steam gathered dust in back rooms. The AC-9, once the pride of the Sierra grades, now faced an enemy it could not match in pulling power or in endurance. Shop crews watched as new diesels arrived by the dozen, their arrival recorded in the same logbooks that had once chronicled every innovation in steam. The race was no longer about raw power or engineering ambition. It was about survival in a world where every cent counted. Within 2 years, the forgotten challenger was outnumbered, outspent, and quietly scheduled for retirement. The numbers had spoken, and the future belonged to diesel. By 1964, the last trace of Southern Pacific's AC-9 had vanished from the rails. Scrap manifests, stamped and initialed in the Sacramento office, document each locomotive's final journey, not to a museum sighting, but to the cutting torch. The records show no hesitation. All units withdrawn from service by late 1963, none set aside for preservation. In the spring of 1963, a proposal from the California State Railroad Museum landed on the desk of Southern Pacific's acquisitions officer. The letter, carefully worded, requested the donation of a single AC-9 for public display. The reply came swiftly. No surplus units were available for preservation. The disposal process was already underway. The correspondence is still filed in the museum's archives, a quiet testament to what might have been. For the AC-9, there would be no restoration, no static display, no commemorative plaque. Shop ledgers list only the weight of recovered steel and the date each engine left the property. Unlike the Big Boy, whose preserved hulks anchor exhibits from Scranton to Dallas, the AC-9 left behind nothing but paperwork and a handful of faded photographs. Even among curators, memories of the engine are fragmentary, reduced to a line in a ledger, a denied acquisition, an absence in the museum's roundhouse. In the end, the Challenger, engineered to surpass a legend, was quietly erased, leaving only questions in its wake. One engine became an icon, its Challenger a footnote. Today, innovation still risks vanishing if it arrives before its time or lacks champions. The Big Boy's myth endures, because memory, not merit, writes history. How many breakthroughs have we lost to obscurity? Sometimes the true revolution is forgotten before it even has a chance. What do you think? Does legacy depend on luck or on greatness? Like, comment, and subscribe to join the debate.